como añadir subtítulos en tu idioma. Paso 1. Haz clic en el icono CC en la parte inferior derecha del vídeo para activar los subtítulos. Paso 2. Haz clic en el icono de configuración. Paso 3. Haz clic en subtítulos /diagonal CC1. Paso 4. Haga clic en autogenerar. Paso 5. Selecciona tu idioma. Selecciona tu idioma. En este punto deberías empezar a ver subtítulos en el idioma seleccionado.
Comment ajouter des sous-titres dans votre langue? Étape 1. Cliquez sur l'icône CC en bas à droite de la vidéo pour activer les sous-titres. Étape 2. Cliquez sur l'icône des paramètres. Étape 3. Cliquez sur sous-titres CC1. Étape 4. Cliquez sur Génération automatique. 5e étape. Sélectionnez votre langue. À ce stade, vous devriez commencer à voir des sous-titres dans la langue que vous avez sélectionnée.
Super. So we want to take questions in the chat, partly because of this translation challenge that we want people to be able to ask questions in French, and we also want the answers to be audible in French. So if you have any questions about that, please can you put them in the chat now? Particularly questions about when you're thinking about how it applies to NPOs that you're familiar with. Does that definition of NPOs match your understanding? Does it work in your context? What questions do you have? I'm just going to pin myself and Phil. And also you could ask questions about the primary users. If you had noticed about who are the primary users of the financial statements and their needs. Maybe you had questions about branches and thinking about the definition of a branch. Perhaps about this idea of how to define control in a non-profit context, or perhaps to do with consolidation. As we get those questions, I'm also going to introduce Stephen Kane, who's joined us. He's also a SIPFA associate and is also very involved with Philip in the drafting of this content. So delighted to have you here. So we've got a couple of questions here, and I've got some that other people have put in before as well. So let's kick this one off. Consolidated financial statements is derived from IFRS for SME. What's the explanation of its relationship with IPSAS and full IFRS? So I guess the relationship between IFRS for SME and IPSAS and full IFRS with INPAG. Who wants to take that? Stephen, fire away. Thank you.
Right, okay. All of the concepts of consolidation are broadly lined up, but the IFRS for SMEs, because it's for smaller entities, has some simplifications in it. And so some of the tests as to why you should consolidate or not are easier. That's the key fact.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip. So we're using IFRS for SME because it's simpler. There's a question here about, I'm not sure we can really answer this one, about how can an NPO achieve its strategies with the right structure. I think what we can look at here is how to define different structures. So I'm going to hold that one on strategies. I have a question here about defining the definition of the NPO. Why did we not use existing definitions of NPOs from legal frameworks or statistical accounting? Why come up with something with these three criteria and the indicators? Why did you develop something separate?
I think the first thing, Sam, to note is we don't have a definition of non-profit organisations. It's very much a description. When we were initially looking at this, we examined existing definitions of non-profit organisations from other frameworks, be those legal frameworks in individual jurisdictions, and also accounting frameworks, including statistical accounting frameworks. I think what we thought is that if we had a definition based on those, we were going to be excluding a lot of the entities that we thought could benefit from INPAG, and that wouldn't enable it to be a sort of global inclusive framework. So we came up with this broad characteristics approach, which we initially put forward in the consultation paper. I think there was a resounding yes to that approach, but there were some of the broad characteristics we put forward, which people felt actually would either scope in entities that they didn't think were NPOs, such as private sector hospitals, who obviously do provide a benefit and a social purpose, but direct surpluses often for shareholders, or scope out entities that should have been included, such as grant-giving bodies who provide funding to other NPOs. So working with our advisory groups, we've come to this broad characteristics description, which we think is going to be best able to enable us to develop standards and guidance that meets a wide range of different entities who can benefit from INPAG, and will also hopefully allow jurisdictions to look at the kind of entities we think will benefit, and for individual entities to look at it and say, actually, yes, I might not perfectly meet this, but that kind of describes who I am, so INPAG will be for me.
Brilliant, thank you, Philip. I just want to apologise for those of you following in the translator app. We'll try and find a good solution to share this with you at a later date. I've got a great question in here from Getnet Haile in Ethiopia. We have international NGOs operating in Ethiopia. Some of them have the mandate to solicit funds locally, and others are fully dependent on their international HQs. So INGOs operating in Ethiopia are considered as a reporting entity, regardless of the extent of their relationship with their HQ. So they're deemed reporting entities in Ethiopia. Under this context, can an INGO be considered as a reporting entity to fully apply this standard? So I guess you're thinking about the international entity, but also the INGO branch in Ethiopia. How do we handle the equity net asset section in the statement of financial position when the INGO is fully dependent on its headquarters, but required to present general purpose financial statements under the local jurisdiction? Now, I know we've got another webinar on financial statement presentation and framework tomorrow and Wednesday, which might help answer the second part of the question. But Philip or Stephen, would you like to answer that in the context of Ethiopia?
I can make a start, Stephen, if you want to jump in.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, so I think the thing to recognise for all of INPAG is that ultimately it will be individual jurisdictions that determine how it applies. So although the way the INPAG guidance is written, any international NGO that actually is operating as what we'd call like a branch, which doesn't actually have full power over its own policies, finances, for INPAG, in theory, following the guidance, that would be consolidated upwards into whichever entity is ultimately controlling it. But what we have made very clear, I think, in the guidance and the surrounding material is that if an individual jurisdiction still wants an individual branch, say, to prepare its own financial reports and financial statements, that will be for that individual jurisdiction to determine. What we would then hope is that if that branch is preparing financial reports, those will be prepared in accordance ultimately with INPAG. So it will ultimately be for the individual jurisdiction to decide. Stephen, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's everything. You've covered the main points, which are about choice in the jurisdiction, and you've covered the fact that it would be nice to have a consolidation, but if it's a consolidation of an international entity, that won't be a choice for that jurisdiction to make.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's covered off some other questions that have come in, but I think it's important to restate them. So Philip has asked, is it fair to say that the local jurisdiction will be a key decision maker of whether a specific entity can apply this guidance? Yes, very firm yes. And I think that's really important to reiterate that. So thanks, Philip. INPAG is offering to that jurisdiction an option to adopt this as their model for an NPO. That's exactly right. We're creating international guidance that each jurisdiction, rather than developing its own, can look to take off the shelf and apply in its context, just like IFRS for SME or any other international accounting standard in exactly the same way. Related with the question earlier, will this relate to charities? I guess that's a UK focused question. Same answer, it is up to the UK jurisdiction as to if and when this will apply to charities. Certainly in the definition, well, let me speak, Philip or Stephen, do you want to speak to that in terms of, does a UK charity fall within the definition of an NPO?
Yeah, so description of an NPO, effectively, yes, we'd expect this is quite UK specific, but a charitable organisation is the kind of entity we are considering as a sort of core NPO for the guidance. And I think if you look at how INPAG is developing, the SORP and INPAG are often finding similar solutions to similar transactions and similar reporting principles. What we won't say is that INPAG will override the SORP, because we have no jurisdictional power to say who, if anyone, should apply INPAG. But yes, in the UK context, a charity is certainly falling within the description of an NPO.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's really good to separate those two questions. They are two different questions, so that's great, thank you. There's a great question here from Anur Siddiq. We have many projects as consortium with other local NGOs and INGOs. We have the same partners. So you might have a consortium of donors working with the same local organizations on a similar project. Could we consolidate our financial reports based on IFR for NPO? So if it's a consortium, a sort of joint venture, would that mean you have to prepare consolidated accounts?
A very good question. So this actually falls into a number of areas, and it will very much depend on how the project is set up and whether an entity has been established to sort of finance and deliver the project. What we'd call this in the accounting world is a sort of principal agent consideration, and it will be very much dependent on which of the entities or which NGO actually has sort of control and responsibility for the project and is contracting with other entities to deliver, and which NGO is actually just carrying out an activity on behalf of another entity. I think for INPAG, we are looking to add guidance on these kind of principal agent issues throughout the guidance where it arises, but it will be very much on a individual project by project basis, whether an individual entity is going to consolidate in basically all of the transactions and economic events related to that project, whether it will just consolidate in some of the individual transactions that it personally is responsible for delivering and is financing. But it is something that is considered in the guidance, and something that if you apply the guidance, you will be able to get to the correct result for your financial reports.
Not a straightforward answer, but something that certainly the guidance provided. Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is just to say that consolidation is normally on the basis of control, and these consortia where NPOs are operating for similar purposes will not normally grant the power which is required, the power of one entity over another, to allow consolidation.
Great, and there's one little line in the video, which is a donor-grantee relationship will not normally be a sort of an ongoing power relationship between one entity and another that's on an ongoing basis. So a funding relationship isn't normally going to be the kind of level of long-term entity level power that would require consolidation. So we really are looking at international NGOs, branches, those kinds of arrangements where a consolidated set of financial statements would really make sense. We're not trying to make things complicated where they don't need to be. It's just that in situations where it is relevant, it's important to have guidance. So another question relates to membership organizations. This has come up in our advisory groups as well. You talked about in the explainer video that the definition of an NPO is that they have public benefit. But what if that public isn't very large? How big does the public need to be for this organization to be classified as a non-profit organization?
Many thanks, Sam. Yeah, so one of the broad characteristics is that an NPO should have a primary objective of providing a benefit to the public. Who that public is can vary. We've tried to be as inclusive as possible in describing NPOs and using the broad characteristics. So that public could actually be quite small. It could be a small community, a group, and it could also be restricted to the members of an NPO. What is essential is that there is that sort of public benefit that the NPO is looking to achieve. There may be private benefits from the NPO's activities. So the example of the video was a sports club where individuals who are members of that club will be receiving discounted, say, tuition or discounted coaching, but the overall purpose of that club is to improve the welfare of those individuals. It's not a way, say, of disguising private benefits that could be provided to individuals by being members. So as long as an entity has a primary objective of providing a benefit to the public and any private benefits are incidental to that primary objective of benefiting the public, our guidance should be applicable. But it's also why we have added those additional indicators, because we know it's never clear cut. There is a lot of grey that we have noticed. And what we don't want to do is exclude entities that really could benefit from this guidance by having a harsh description or definition that will not be applicable across all jurisdictions.
Thank you, Phil. So the intention was to be inclusive as possible. I've got some great questions here in the chat. Anwar Chowdhury has asked if a controlling NPO should prepare a financial statements based on INPAG, is it necessary that separate financial statements need to be prepared for various projects implemented by the NPO?
Should I take that, Sam, or would Karen?
I'm happy to take that on, and Phil, you can fill in behind me as need be. Project level information or program level information is something that has come up in the development of our work, and we've actually not produced anything at the moment, but we are looking into the possibility of a supplementary statement that could provide project or program level information as part of general purpose financial reports. That's being explored at the moment, and we will include proposals for that as part of the third exposure draft. So very much as part of our thinking, because we recognise that it is something that is of interest for many NPOs, but it needs a considered amount of work, and we are drawing on expertise from our advisory groups to come up with, and that includes donors, to come up with proposals that will hopefully help NPOs with a principles-based approach to the kinds of information that should be included as part of general purpose financial reports.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen.
So there's a question here about, it says that having in mind some profit or non-profit actions performed by an NPO, do we think that at some point that in terms of that control perspective, that there'll be some kind of interpretation around transfer pricing? I'm going to ask either Phil or Stephen to pick that one up. Phil, do you want to have a crack first at that?
I certainly will. So transfer pricing, I will be the first to admit, having dabbled with it a little in the past, I am not the world's greatest expert on transfer pricing. What we are looking to do is make sure, though, that where an NPO has activities that do generate surpluses and revenues, the guidance that we are providing on revenue and expenses should hopefully be all-encompassing. So an NPO's profit-generating activities will, in theory, be accounted for under the same revenue guidance as its non-profit-making activities, using the same principles. If you are talking about a broader group perspective, where, say, one part of the group is effectively almost selling services to another, I think that is something that currently is outside of our scope and transfer pricing for me. And then you're moving almost beyond the sort of general purpose financial reporting for non-profits that we've been looking at into more pure financial reporting for private sector organizations, and also taxation, accounting and reporting. So it's not something we're looking at specifically, but our overall guidance, whatever activities an NPO does, if it is an NPO for the purposes of INPAG, its activities should, whether they are profit or non-profit making, be recognized, measured and disclosed under the same overall guidance.
Sam, we can't hear you, I'm afraid. I'm just going to go back to a question that came up about in the invitation to comments. We have got, we described 3 tiers in there: full IFRS, INPAG and cash-based accounting. And there are some questions in there about, are we going to be consulting on a cash-based level? And will we be providing any guidance around that? And are we going to provide guidance about thresholds? This has been a complex question for us to consider in terms of kind of who are the target group for this set of guidance. And one of the things that we have been keen to do is to not look at thresholds, because what is large in or small in one jurisdiction isn't in another. And so I think it's for each jurisdiction to determine where the cutoffs are. In terms of IFRS, full IFRS, its own definitions talk about public accountability. So that provides a threshold there. We're really trying to target this guidance at those NPOs that for whom accrual-based accounting is appropriate because of the types of assets, liabilities and transactions that it undertakes. And so we're not looking at the smallest entities for whom cash might be appropriate, because it's a very small community based type organization. I kind of acknowledge in some ways that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I think it really is too difficult to actually say, if it was, a million of a local currency or 20,000 of a local currency, whether that would be small or not. So it really needs to be for each jurisdiction to determine.
Super, thank you, Karen. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, super. I've changed microphone. I think we've got time for one more question, and there's a good one here in the chat about the topic of consolidation. It's Jose in Venezuela saying, is consolidation really relevant for non-profit organizations at all? We don't have ownership in the same way. What about, isn't combined financial statements more applicable to the sector? Why are we talking about consolidation at all? Good question. Stephen, do you want to take that one?
Certainly. In the private sector, it's generally held that consolidated accounts are the only way to get a complete picture of economic activity in a way that is objective. There are costs as well as benefits, but the benefits are considered to totally outweigh the costs. A lot of this is true for NPOs, and so in many circumstances, there will be exactly the same benefits as in private sector circumstances. It is a bit more complicated, and the costs may, in certain circumstances, people may think that they're not proportionate. This isn't something that we're exploring in this exposure draft, but although we have discussed situations where things might not be consolidated, but we're not exploring this particular issue right now. But it is slightly less straightforward than in the private sector context. So we are going to be asking questions about that. But I would give a resounding positive to, for very many NPOs, it's really important, just as important as in a private sector context.
Thank you. And we did have focus groups that looked at this question in a lot of depth and really tried to unpick why is consolidation relevant, or why wouldn't it be relevant? And we have had different viewpoints, and people in the sector and the accountants really coming with different angles on this. So it's an important question. We have come down for ED1 with consolidation is relevant. We do have control in entities. You have INGOs with branches and a headquarters, and they really do exercise control, and the full financial statements are relevant. So that's what this is, guidance is for, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on it. So thank you for that question. We've got 5 minutes. I'm going to wrap us up with the final part of our presentation today. Let me find. Good. So it's been really, really interesting hearing your questions and the types of issues and ideas that it has brought up. You're really welcome to share your thoughts on any aspect of the first exposure draft, but the project team has drafted specific questions for you that we're particularly keen to get your feedback on. They relate to how we've defined NPOs and about this question of consolidation as well. You're welcome to share your views until the 31st of March. So, oh, there we go. Sorry, the slides are behaving strangely. Just bear with me. So we really hope that you will use your voice and share your feedback. And to submit a response, you can go to the link www.ifr4npo.org/have-your-say. You can also fill out this short form to let us know that you intend to submit a response so that we can support you as needed. It's not a formal commitment, but it's really helpful for us to know that people are working on their responses so that we know how many to expect. Looking ahead, the next 2 exposure drafts are planned to be released around the end of June and November 2023. Feedback will then be used to draft the final guidance, which we expect to issue in 2025, ready for adoption and use. You will receive a follow-up email with the slide decks in English and Spanish, the links to the explainer videos, and all the links that you need to engage with us on this topic and to engage with the project moving forward. So finally, thank you for joining us on this journey to improve the quality, relevance and consistency of financial reporting in the sector. Please do share your voice and shape the future, and do stay in touch by visiting the website, following the project on social media and reading our newsletters. I would like to give a final word of thanks to Karen Sanderson and Philip Trotter and Stephen Kane and Brian Menya for joining us today and for all your wisdom, advice and insights, and all of you for the questions and the perspectives that you bring. So thank you so much, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow for the next one. Let me stop recording.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.